It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview the business owner of a sports podcast called Noontime Sports Podcast. How are you doing today?
Brandon, it's great to be with you. Hope all is well with you and your family, and everyone's staying safe, doing well, and having a great fall. But excited to join you on your show today.
Can you talk about how you knew you wanted to start a sports podcast?
Sure. So, I'm from as we talked off the air, I'm from the Boston area originally. So you can imagine being up here, being bombarded by every single day. Got Patriots, Celtics, Bruins, Red Sox, Revolution too. We've got some colleges. We've got some great high schools around here. So for me, growing up, I always knew that I wanted to get involved with sports, but I would say it really wasn't until after I graduated Wheaton College here in Massachusetts, where I started deciding I wanted to interview folks from a whole bunch of different areas of the sports world, which I continue to do through Noontime Sports, which again, I appreciate being able to promote and plug. And from my end, especially recently now because of COVID, the whole idea of the podcast is not just to continue to get a lot of folks from the different aspects of sports, athletics, because we both know there's so many pillars under the athletic umbrella. There's sports leagues, there's sports business, there's media, there's social media, marketing, nonprofits, there's recreation. And so being able to kind of tell those stories, what they're doing and how they're able to, quote unquote, being able to weather the storm during this time, number one, but number two, provide somewhat of a positive outlet for folks who might need something to lift their spirits during this time. So, like I said, I grew up here in Boston, read obviously the sports section, listened to the radio, and always was saying, hey, maybe one of these days I'll do my own show. And it really started in 2010. And over the past couple of years, I've been very fortunate to really focus and hone in on it. And it's been a lot of fun.
Can you talk about what you cover in your sports podcast?
Absolutely. So just as I mentioned a few seconds ago, the podcast itself, Brandon, is taken on multiple kind of over the years. It's been a combination of like maybe the equivalent of like a sports talk radio. So maybe, hey, Patriots coming off a tough game or a big win and wanting to get a reporter on, whether it was from the Boston Globe or the Boston Herald or from a website, and analyzing that in a way. And then obviously over time, it's also become more of talking about career development. Hey, how did you get to your role? Hey, how did you do what you're doing? What are some advice that you have for folks that are maybe in college or high school or wanting to get, into the sports field or get into athletics? And so it's been a lot of fun over the past couple of weeks and months, especially since April, I would say, to be able to have individuals from a whole bunch of backgrounds, whether they're within the college world, the high school world, social sports world for adult leagues around here in Boston, to people that are doing great things in the nonprofit world. So the podcast itself, again, really has a more focus on Massachusetts and New England, but we also are fortunate to have some folks from other parts of the country join in, and also from the startup world, which has been a lot of fun.
Can you talk about how you knew that you wanted to write in a sports blog and start a sports blog?
Sure. So, just like you, I'm passionate. I love sports. Again, growing up in the Boston area here, I know I sound a little bit like a broken record, so I apologize. From my perspective, my first love for sports, it's kind of a geek out type of story here, Brandon, but hopefully I'll make you smile and make your listeners smile too. When I was 8 years old, one of the big things that we had in our house at the time was we just moved to a new house and my family got something called DirecTV satellite. And for us, a lot of us were thinking, now we know what satellite TV is. We know what cord cutting and DirecTV and NFL Sunday Ticket. But one of the things that I always made sure to do on Sunday mornings at 11:58 a.m. was to park myself on my family's couch, turn on the Fox Sports, so that the minute that 12 o'clock game, I could watch the NFL on Sunday, pregame show. And for me, I loved the deep voice. I loved hearing Pat Summerall and John Madden. Again, being a Patriot fan, I'm also a Dallas Cowboys fan. So they're playing on Fox a lot growing up. And from my end, it was the robot that we still see occasionally through Fox Sports. That was the kind of the aha moment that maybe one day this is something I'd like to do. So, over the years, I had the privilege of not just, eventually getting into the sports by writing, for my high school newspaper and college newspaper, but I started Noontime Sports at Wheaton College as a junior going into my senior year. So, late spring, early summer of May 2009. And Noontime Sports, I've been running it for 11 years. And for me, it's been a great opportunity to connect with folks like yourself that, are passionate about writing, or passionate about blogging, podcasting, creating content for Instagram or Facebook or YouTube and other outlets as well. And so for me, it's just been a great journey, and it's been something that I'm very fortunate enough that I've been able to continue to do. As we both know, maintaining a blog, maintaining a website, it takes time. It takes a lot of effort, but the past 11 years have been a lot of fun, and I'm interested to see what the next 11 years brings.
That's wonderful that you've been in it for 11 years. Can you talk about how you came up with the name Noontime Sports?
Sure. So it goes back to my summer camp days. I give credit to a counselor who we share a mutual friend that we continue to stay in touch with today. He gave me the nickname Noontime. Now, my last name is Noonan, and which is a common last name. There's a lot of folks out there that will occasionally say, are you related to this Noonan or that Noonan and so forth? And unfortunately, I'm not. But somehow Noonan spun into Noontime, and that became, back in the day, my AIM kind of screen name. And other folks obviously came up with some other funny nicknames off of Noonan, but it was a nickname to me that I felt like had something and was kind of, people would remember it as. And it's great because I eventually one day just thought about myself, hey, maybe I'll call it Noontime Sports is what I did. And so it's, a lot of people refer to it, I would say, as Noontime more than just Noontime Sports, but that's how the name originated.
Do y'all start on air at 12 p.m. noontime?
No, that's a good question, Brandon. There's a lot of folks that say, how about, 12 o'clock podcasts or 12 o'clock blogs and so forth. Honestly, it just depends on, my day-to-day basis, what I have going on in the content calendar or what's happening, whether it's around here with a college sport or with the high schools, or maybe something revolving around the Boston sports circuit or the New England sports circuit. So, it's a great question. I appreciate you asking, but we don't have to wait till noon. If we want to get something up at 8 a.m. or 7 a.m. or, post something at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that's a possibility.
What topics do you cover, and what different segments do you cover in your podcasts?
Sure. So the blog, let's start off with the blog, if you don't mind. So the blog has been very hyper-focused recently over the past couple of years on the small colleges here in New England, whether it's a Division III, a Division II, the Ivies. We've got a couple of Ivies not only here in New England, but also throughout the Northeast, if you want to include some in the New York area with Cornell and Columbia, and down in New Jersey with Princeton. And then also you can factor in Holy Cross. When we first kind of started the blog, my friends and I were using it as a tool to really kind of write op-ed pieces about, maybe the Patriots, Celtics, Bruins, Red Sox, a national story that was going on, whether it was in our backyard or down south, out west in the Midwest, or maybe perhaps even around the world. But I would say in 2011, it really was, I was fortunate enough to be a correspondent for a couple of sites here, Patch, ESPN, Boston.com, was also working for iHeartRadio as well. And I really kind of thought about, what do I see this blog becoming down the road? Because we both know one of the most important things when it comes to blogging and podcasting and doing shows on YouTube or Twitch or however you want to get the word out to your friends and followers, you need to come up with a niche. You need to kind of come up with a plan of what is your site about. You need to know your audience. You want to understand what they're looking for and so forth. So for me, college sports really wasn't kind of the big go-to around here, because again, Boston is a major top 10 major market. And so of course you're going to have front page news, whether it's websites, newspapers, television, radio. It's going to be about the major four: Patriots, Red Sox, Celtics, and Bruins. But I felt like what I wanted to do was provide an outlet for maybe the schools that weren't getting the coverage on a day-to-day basis or a weekly basis. Schools such as, Bentley or a Northeastern or a Tufts University, maybe even, going further out to Springfield and down to Trinity College and up north to Bates and Bowdoin and Husson, Middlebury as well. Schools like them, they'll occasionally appear like in a New York Times or a Sports Illustrated, or perhaps maybe get on their local news. But what I wanted to do was really provide some sort of outlet. I wanted to focus on covering football. I wanted to cover basketball, and I'm a lacrosse official and, lacrosse aficionado. I love the sport. I love the game, and wanted to provide, focus on those three sports. I, did for a little bit focus on the Hockey East, which is hands down the predominant #1 Division I conference here for hockey in the Northeast and around the country. It features teams such as Boston College and Boston University to UMass Lowell and University of New Hampshire and University of Maine and Vermont and others. But for me, I really wanted to focus on that. So going off to focusing on that, and then also kind of doing the podcast, I wanted to have the podcast be not just also a one-off of the blog, but also, again, an opportunity to provide some positive coverage, content, #1, and #2, maybe something else outside of the college world. Not saying that we can't focus on college sports. If it wasn't for COVID, we would be doing a weekly, D3 New England football podcast focusing on games, outcomes, and so forth. We'd do probably a monologue on a Monday morning. And then my friend and I, from In the D3 Football Huddle, James Baker, who does a great podcast with Frank Rossi, they've been covering D3 football for the past decade and a half. And between the two of them, a little longer, we would team up and we would do a Friday edition, kind of the equivalent of what you listen to on some Friday podcast for getting everyone excited for the upcoming NFL or college football weekend. So I know it was a long-winded answer for you there, Brandon, but that's kind of, the background of Noontime, what we decided to focus on. And, we do dabble in other areas as well. But at the end of the day, the bread and butter is still the small colleges and some of the small high schools in Eastern Massachusetts.
Can you talk about covering, of course, whenever Tom Brady left the Patriots, can you talk about covering that and moving to Tampa Bay?
Sure. So, again, not really having the biggest, Boston, we have a good, chunk of Boston sports fans on Twitter and friends, obviously, on Facebook that follow us, and as well as through, I think, Instagram too. But I think, for Tom Brady, one of the things that I was trying to think about was, hey, how do you try to maybe reflect on, what he did or what, the impact he has, kind of going back to my last answer, the Tom Brady it's a great question you asked, Brandon, because everyone wants to write or blog or podcast or kind of get on YouTube or some sort of streaming service and say, hey, here's my 2 cents on Tom Brady. But I think one of the most important things that I was trying to do when it would come to a Tom Brady situation was think about maybe perhaps what were other people writing or what were other people saying, and what was something that maybe they're not saying or something that, you could maybe go into. So, when it came to a coverage, we do a thing every Monday through Friday called the Daily Noontime, which links to a lot of news and updates and stories across the web and YouTube videos as well, or Instagram posts. So that was probably more of where we, kind of focused on. But, I would say there was probably some talk more on social media or doing a YouTube video, I believe, back in March. It seems like ages ago, Brandon, but, that was kind of, from our end, we were still in the process of wrapping up kind of the college sports world because there was so much unknown in mid to late March, whether we would be sidelined for 3 weeks or for a couple of months and so forth. So it was on our radar, but I think at the time it wasn't, again, just because we were having college basketball, March Madness, and the start of college lacrosse season, we were still focusing on that, but, made sure to kind of, do some sort of salute to 20 years that he did here with the Patriots, which to me, Brandon, seems like it flew by very quick.
Can you talk about your segment, the Noontime Report?
Are you talking about the Daily Noontime as we were talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So the Daily Noontime was an original piece of content that I started back in late 2010. And to me, it was, right now, you and I both know this, and your fans know this, your listeners know this. The Daily Noontime is one of many of those go-to kind of email marketing to, being able to just kind of go on to a news site. Hey, here's the 5 things you need to know about sports today, or here's the 1-minute drill, or hey, here's a link to, 17 links to hypothetically of, what we took away from the Patriots game the other day or the Red Sox game. So to me, the Daily Noontime has evolved. Initially it started out kind of as the quote unquote newsletter of the website. It's come and gone over the years, but now that it's back, one of the things that I've really tried to make more of try to, again, keep it under the Noontime brand and the marketing of, hey, we're fun. We want to be upbeat. We want to be positive. And so, it's a combination of both, of course, sharing links, both locally Massachusetts based, New England based, but then also, you've got the Dodgers and the Rays in the World Series. So trying to find some videos or links to some stories that are interesting, to maybe perhaps things that are going on in the tech world or going on in the business world that maybe your fans or followers may not know about, but could perhaps apply to down the road or be seen with, with the major four or with a New England college or some of the high schools or amateur leagues. So that to me is something that I take a lot of great pride in. It's the oldest piece of daily content that I put out Monday through Friday, and it started back in 2010. And again, it's taken on multiple forms over the years, but it's a great piece, and it's something I take a lot of pride in my to start my day. And it's been great to have a lot of fans and followers say, hey, they can get on start their day by just hopping on through social media if they see it, or just going to the website and catching up on some of the news and some of the links. And one of the things, as I said earlier on in this interview with you, I try to make sure that I'm getting content that may not be always the go-to content. So if someone's going to say a major outlet, well, let's try to find maybe a small blog, or maybe someone that's on Twitter, or someone that's, may not have the biggest following, that we could go back to there. And then that kind of shows that, hey, we're not just going to link to the New York Times or the Boston Globe all the time. We'll be able to link someone's blog or someone's social presence and give them some pub as well.
Can you talk about how your podcast and your blog, the Noontime Sports, have adapted due to COVID and not being able to go to live high school games or even live college games?
Sure, and that's a great question, Brandon. And I think that we're all continuing trying to figure out how do we adapt. Going back to a previous answer, I think when everything kind of came to a screeching stop in a way around not only here, down where you are, all around the country, all around the world, I think a lot of us were trying to kind of figure out exactly, hey, how long is this going to last? And, will we be able to get back on the field or get back into a gym, or, be able to sit down and do a one-on-one interview with a coach or a player? But as time evolved, I think one of the most important things that we try to focus on was a couple things. Short blog posts, if there was some links or news that were going on, for a majority of the kind of the second half of the winter, or the transition from the winter to the spring and the spring to the summertime, we both know there was a lot of news surrounding college football. The NFL was doing a virtual draft. There was some wrapping up of our weekly polls we do for our New England D3 top 10 for basketball. We're wrapping up our end of the year awards for the Worcester Area College Basketball Association. That's a partnership that we've developed and have continued to be a part of. It's had with us, since 2012. And it's a great partnership and a great way to work with the colleges and the student athletes and the programs in the Worcester area. So, we had that to wrap up. We had college lacrosse to wrap up, and then it was difficult because, we like to do these end of the year teams and end of the year awards and so forth. And you had a small sample size because some schools, as we both know, or some programs, only got a couple of games in, or some teams got one game. And so, it was a combination of that, as I alluded to also a few seconds ago, doing some short blog posts, linking back to maybe some major news or, some kind of quote unquote clickbait in a way. But then, as time went on, I really had to kind of think about, what does my audience want? What are some things that we can continue to engage with them? And so we started a all decade team for Division III for certain states and certain parts of New England. We did some top 10 lists. We did some interviews, both in the college world, but then outside of the college world. And, the podcast currently has been able to attract a lot of new voices and a lot of new faces and friends from, as I said at the beginning of this interview, from around the athletic world, and to be able to tell their stories about how are they adapting, what are some changes that they're doing or things that they're doing through their organization, their business model, how they've kind of adapted. So, in a way, we've had to be kind of, put on the creative cap and say, what are some things that our audience want? What are some things that we can try to continue with, that, to provide some sort of sense of normalcy? As I alluded to mentioned a few minutes ago, one of our guys that's always been on the podcast, especially during D3 football season around here in New England, is James Baker from In the D3 Football Huddle with Frank Rossi. And, he would come on. We're doing every couple of weeks, kind of the state of Division III and doing a hyper focus on New England and Massachusetts. So still keeping that going, but also trying to adapt and trying to understand what other leagues are doing, what other conferences are doing. And as we head towards the later half of the fall and the winter, we're probably going to be putting out some more top 10 lists and some more all decades and some of our great moments that we've been able to cover over the past couple of years, and really try to again provide our audience with the content that they want to consume and they want.
What do you look forward to accomplishing and even achieving whenever we get back onto the field or even court of a live game?
Another great question, Brandon. So I think that at the end of the day, I think there's a couple of things. Being able to do a couple podcasts each week, being able to attract different guests that we don't normally would get on. I mean, we've had some folks, like I said, from the college world that probably wouldn't be on our radar initially, but they were great folks or great friends to be able to give us some insight, not only how things are looking from a small college, whether it's Division III or an athletic department, or perhaps folks from we're fortunate enough to have two great members of Team Impact, which is a phenomenal nonprofit and organization here based in the Boston area. Them coming on and talking about what they've been able to do and being able to promote their great work. We've had some folks from the startup world with Gipper, to Athlete Foundry, and to other folks from around the country. And being able to have those voices come on has been huge and been a lot of fun. But I think that, at the end of the day, Brandon, I think, for a lot of us, we're all itching for that day to get back on the field, give fist pounds and bumps, and be able to kind of have that closer contact and not have to do the social distancing. And I think from my end, I look forward to, seeing where the podcast goes, continue to grow that. But I also think that, being able to, use this time to really kind of flex the creative muscles, and being able to maybe perhaps go back in time and revisit stories that we covered, telling game stories of, hey, this is something that we did or not. One of the other things that I've started as well through Noontime is focusing on creative content. Right now, as we both know, there's a lot of live content that you can stream or you can watch on your local cable. But one of the things that I've been trying to do is, tell the story about Noontime Sports. We started the Inside Noontime series about, how it got started and so forth. And there's some more chapters to come on that. I've started writing a fictional story about a made-up high school football team based in Berkshire County, and put out the first chapter about 2 weeks ago, and look forward to continuing to provide that. So I would say at the end of the day, just continuing to pump something out on a daily basis for the audience, and tapping into other folks that maybe we wouldn't always be covering or focusing on a daily basis or a weekly basis. It's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to continuing those relationships and those friendships that we're establishing post-COVID.
That's wonderful. What colleges do you cover in your area?
Oh man, if I list them all on, we'd be here all day, Brandon. So I'll do the best I can. But we keep the focus on the small colleges, the Division III level, from Maine down to Connecticut. So that's a lot of schools to name all at once. So I'll obviously give a shout out to my alma mater, Wheaton College, and the conference that they're in, the NUMAC, with Babson and MIT and Springfield. We have the NESCACs, we have Endicott, down to Sal, the Regina. We've got Western New England. We got the Amherst, the Williams, the Tufts of the world, Middlebury, Plymouth State, Framingham State. So the list goes on. Bridgewater State and UMass, Dartmouth, of course, others as well. So we focus on those. Occasionally we will tap into the Bentley Universities, Assumptions, the Stonehills of the world too. When it comes to college basketball, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, and a previous question you asked, we've developed and created a partnership about 8 years ago with the Worcester Area College Basketball Association, which I think celebrated about 50 years, either this year or last year. So being able to do a Player of the Week, Rookie of the Week from schools such as Holy Cross to Nichols and Assumption and WPI and Worcester State and Fitchburg State. So those are some schools as well. We do keep our eyes on some of the Ivies, Harvard, to Dartmouth and Brown also being in our backyard. And of course there's others. And then, the Holy Cross of the world, the UMasses, and, occasionally the Boston colleges, the Northeasterns, and, BUs. As I mentioned, we have covered and kept our eyes on Hockey East, both men's and women's. So doing that. And then, when it comes to, and then, again, I alluded to it, sometimes we'll throw in the occasional op-ed or commentary piece on the pros.
That's wonderful. What advice would you give upcoming sports blogs looking to get started?
Great question. And that's a question I think that, a lot of people are always asking for advice on. I'll go back to an initial answer I made a couple of minutes ago on your show here during this interview. One of the things that I think is so important when I talk to college students or those that are coming out, or maybe those that say, hey, I want to get into blogging, or I want to get into content creation. What can I do? The biggest thing I would say to someone is, and I've had some of these conversations with folks over the past couple of weeks and months during this time, is I would say find something that you love and that you're passionate about. So, let's use an example of, there's certain, we both know the major four has a lot of content out there, whether you're a fan of, LeBron James and the Lakers, Tom Brady and the Buccaneers now, Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers, if you're a Boston Bruins fan, Red Sox. Right now, we've got two teams duking it out in the World Series, the LA Dodgers and the Tampa Bay Rays. You can cover those teams. Obviously you may, be a blogger or podcaster, but if you do things like that, try to find angles that, folks aren't doing. The reason why it's taken me a long time to build up the excitement, and it's been great with all the partnerships and the relationships that we've been able to build and the friendships, as well, through the small college world, was it really was an untapped area that no one was going after. And again, I really credit the folks that do high school sports around here because they were the one that really kind of gave me the initiative to say, hey, listen, find something that, people may be passionate about or may not know too much about, and go become the expert in it. So the key word, as I alluded to there, was expert. And so, there's a lot of upcoming sports. There's sports out there that don't, always get seen on ESPN, or maybe the Fox Sports of the world, or the ABCs, the CBSs, the NBCs. And those are great opportunities for folks to get into. There's minor league baseball, there's rugby, there's lacrosse, there's soccer, there's, leagues in your backyards, adult sports leagues, perhaps, that, whether it's an amateur league or, a weekly Saturday pickup game or something, people in this day and age, as we both know, they love any type of content that could link back to their social channels, or link back to that they can share on Facebook, and, have their families and friends obviously kind of eat up and so forth. So, I would say try to find something that you love and that you're passionate about, and really become an expert in that area. Like I said, it's not, you can still write about the major teams, but, from my end, I would say if I saw someone that decided to say, you know what, I want to do interviews with, someone from sports business, or, focus on that area, or I want to cover sports startups, but have this certain idea, that's what I would do. And the other thing I would say, in addition to blogging and podcasting, is, you need to be multiverse. Gone are the days of the typical just, hey, I'm going to be a journalist, I'm going to write for a newspaper, or I'm just going to write, or I'm going to be just a television producer, or I want to be on air and so forth. The biggest thing that I've learned over my years, and I continue to learn because I look at it every single day, Brandon, is that as, you got to wake up every single day with the bulldog mentality, number one. But number two is, you need to think about, what do I need to learn, or what are things that I don't know, and be able to master those craft. Learning the Adobe suite right now, being able to not only know graphic work, to Photoshop, to InDesign, Premiere, learn video editing, learn social media, learn analytics. There's a lot of tools out there now in 2020 that there weren't around, or perhaps were not a big focus on, say, in 2010 or 2005. So really kind of become well versed. But I would also say, become very strong in certain areas too. Become very good at video editing and also graphic design. Become very good at, learn coding too. So I know it's a lot that I'm throwing at you and your listeners, but there's a lot out there now that really makes folks have to understand. And, we both have to understand as well, and I think your listeners too, it is a very competitive field, and there's a lot of folks that sometimes will get a chance where they'll be able to do, things pretty fast because of connections and so forth, but also folks that might take 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And I think at the end of the day, the best advice I would end this answer with for you is that you got to be passionate about it, number one, but you got to love it too. It's not a career right away that you're going to go out and, make loads of money and be able to say, hey, I made it. Sometimes it takes people 10, 15, 20, 30 years to really get that first real kind of aha moment or that turning the curve. So, be passionate, love what you do, be willing to adapt, and be willing to learn.
That's wonderful advice. Where can my listeners find your podcast at and your sports blog at on social media, along with any other podcast platforms?
Sure. So we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, Overcast. We're distributing through our podcast gets distributed through Anchor, which is a phenomenal platform to use and a great way to kind of start up a podcast. Number one, we're on Facebook at Noontime Sports, Twitter Noontime Sports, and YouTube is Noontime Sports. Instagram is Noontime Nation. And then in regards to the website, it is Noontime Sports. That's NOONTIME sports.com. And that's where you can find a lot of our blogs. You can find the About Us. You can find information how to contact us, learn more about Noontime Sports. And we're also on LinkedIn too at Noontime Sports. So I think that covers it, Brandon.
Thank you again, Matt, for your interview, and best of luck with your sports business, Noontime Sports. You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Matt, for your interview, and best of luck.
Thanks, Brandon. Great to be with you. Thanks again for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.